The Church Fathers did not seem to like the Sabbath. As we will see, they told Christians not to rest on the Sabbath, and that God had imposed the Sabbath on the Jews because of their sins. Although some Christians will argue that Sunday is their Sabbath, that to me seems a fundamental misunderstanding about early Christianity and church doctrine, and also the very nature of the Sabbath. Because by definition, the Sabbath can only be on the seventh day, Saturday. It's clearly very important because it is included in the Ten Commandments, where it is tied to God's ceasing on the seventh day. In Deuteronomy's account of the Ten Commandments, the Sabbath is a symbol of freedom. The Sabbath is a sign of covenantal relationship with God in Exodus 31, and it is a central theme in some of the latter parts of Isaiah. See chapters 56, 58 and 66. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus is repeatedly shown to be concerned about the proper application of the Sabbath. The accusations leveled against Jesus only relate to the breaking of non-biblical traditions. He defends his disciples plucking grain on the Sabbath and the healings that he performs, neither of which are in conflict with the Torah. Jesus is presented as the authoritative figure when it comes to interpreting the Sabbath commands correctly, arguing against extra restrictions that risk turning a day of benefit into a burden. This is summed up in Jesus' famous statement in Mark 2. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. A sentiment that is echoed in some Jewish literature, such as this one from the Megillah. So we have the Sabbath as a commemoration of God's ceasing, a sign of covenantal relationship, and a symbol of freedom in the Ten Commandments, and its correct implementation being of utmost importance to Jesus. Compare and contrast that to a few examples from the Church Fathers. Ignatius thought Christians should not observe the Sabbath. It is monstrous to talk of Jesus Christ and to practice Judaism, he said, whilst really referring to Sabbath observance. Justin Martyr believed the Sabbath was imposed on the Jews because of their sins, and that God did not take pleasure in such observances. Since Abraham and those before him did not care about observing the Sabbath, said Eusebius, neither does he. Eusebius also thought it would not be unreasonable to describe Abraham as a Christian. Augustine asked rhetorically, which of the Ten Commandments should Christians not keep? Which of the Ten Commandments other than the Sabbath, that is? And the 4th century Council of Laodicea decreed, Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honouring the Lord's Day, and, if they can, resting then as Christians. But if any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema from Christ. These examples illustrate several things. Firstly, the Church Fathers didn't like the Sabbath because they viewed it as a Jewish practice, and clearly they had a problem with that. Secondly, they knew the Sabbath was on Saturday, the 7th day. Sunday worship was not Sabbath on a different day. Despite that, though, they did intend for Sunday worship to replace the Sabbath day, rather than running an additional day commemorating the resurrection alongside the Sabbath. Thirdly, given that they felt the need to make these arguments so forcefully, it is likely that there were many early Christians who observed the Sabbath each Saturday. Some Christians will appeal to Paul, for example in Romans 14, to suggest that which day you keep doesn't really matter, although I never meet people who make that argument and then pick Saturday, the actual 7th day. However, it is debated as to if the Sabbath is what Paul has in mind here. But if it is the Sabbath he is talking about, then his opinion would be diametrically opposed to the Ten Commandments. Clearly, the Church Fathers were concerned about which day identified Christianity, and that it not be the 7th day. They wanted to sever any connection to Judaism. That is why they abandoned the Sabbath. Of course, this is all just my opinion, but I also think their framing of this is incorrect because the Sabbath commands were actually given to the Israelites, predating Judaism. So what about non-Israelites who wanted to follow the God of Israel? I'll be looking at that in the next video.